Welcome to Practical Excel. This is a channel devoted to the learning of Microsoft Excel and obtaining and succeeding in today's technical job market. The goal here is to give you the tools needed to not only learn the many facets of Excel, but also give ideas on the raw power that can be harnessed into job opportunities. On this series, we will begin the understanding the basic tools needed. As the series continues, we'll gradually incorporate everything discussed here into more complex reporting techniques. I'm calling today's lesson the Gauntlet of Functions because instead of just covering one function, we're actually going to be covering 9, and you'll see what the 9 that we are. They're all treat data differently. How we get these to work is very relatively the same. So let's get into it. So here are the 9 that we're going to talk about today: sum, SUMIF, SUMIFS, count, COUNTIF, COUNTIFS, average, AVERAGEIF, AVERAGEIFS. Now, all of these are just different ways of manually manipulating a set of data to find kind of like an aggregate value. Now, the syntax of them, you'll see where the sum, COUNTIF, and AVERAGEIFS, to explain it a little bit, is instead of putting sum, you can put count. Instead of putting count, you can put average. Instead of putting COUNTIF, you can put SUMIF. So you can interchange them all. Sum, count, and average all use the syntax of you just open up the brackets, put in a range of cells, put in or just put in the data that you want, and it'll sum it up. The COUNTIF allows you to put in a range of cells and then what those cells have to equal, and it'll count it or sum it or average it. And then AVERAGEIFS allows you to do multiple criterias. So to get right into it, with sum, all three, for sum, count, and average, here in example 1, you'll see that it's just sum, and then you open the brackets and you highlight the C8 to D11. The same thing with count, and the same thing with average, and they'll all give you the different numbers. And then if you need to end up changing your numbers here, everything automatically will just update as is. Now for SUMIF, you'll see we have name, gender, and test scores, a bunch of different names, and then boy or girl, and then your test scores. And you'll see there's 2 of Lily. That'll play into the if-s's. But for SUMIF, I have it just filtering down for girl and the test scores. And that's just equals SUMIF. Put in the data you want to filter down, what you want to filter it, and then what you're actually going to sum. The only different one is the count, and on that one, because you're just counting, you don't have a kind of a sum range or an average range. You're just counting, and so all you need to do is put in what you want to filter and what you want to filter it for. The same thing goes with average. It looks a lot like the sum because it pretty much is. And so you'll see here again, it's the same criteria. We're filtering for girl, and this is what we're actually averaging this data. Now, for SUMIFS, you have the ability to filter for multiple things. So the first one is what you want to sum, followed by the comma, and then the criteria, what you want it to filter that criteria range for. Then for your next criteria, what's your next criteria, and then what you want to filter that criteria for. So you could just keep going and put another comma and put in a criteria 3 range, followed by what you want to filter it for. In this case, we filtered it all the way down to the name Lily. In the COUNTIFS, it's the exact same, except you're missing the kind of the sum range because all you're doing is counting here. So again, it's just your criteria range followed by what the criteria you want. Now it's also something to note, if you've noticed so far, is you have to put, if it's a text field similar to like you see in these column N's and O's, is if it's a text, you have to put that text in quotes basically. And then the same with AVERAGEIFS, looks exactly like the sum, only because the function's average, it's just going to give an average to it. Now, how would you use this in real life? These are kind of like the basics. You'll end up using these a lot, mostly in combination with other functions. unless you're just kind of summing a column. So here you'll see it's equals sum. I'm summing all of column E. We'll go into, so these are just parts with how many you have on hand, the cost, and the total cost, which the total cost is just a, a referenced multiplication. And there's 1639 pieces of data. So here I just created a basic dashboard that just uses a bunch of the sums or averages and counts. So here's your sum of all your total dollars, which is column E. Here's a count of all the part numbers. And then here is your average unit cost per one. Now you also see that I have the vendors and different vendors. So in the dashboard, it might be nice to split it out by different vendors. And here we'll end up using the SUMIF. So again, it's just as you saw before, the range, the criteria, and what you're going to sum, the range to sum. And the unique parts, where again, it's just going to be a count. And then for your average if, just like you saw in the functionality area of it. And it's just, there's just 3 of them going down. And now checking to see if you have low stock, this is a SUMIFS. And what you're basically going to do, or what I ended up doing here is, I want to sum column D, which is the unit cost. Then sum to filter for the criteria range of the column B, which is the vendor, because we're bringing it out by vendor. And then I also reference the vendor, so if the vendor name ends up changing, you can change it there as well. And then I'm also filtering for C. But what I did with C is I said, you know what, give me anything that's less than 50. So the idea being, if it's less than 50, we want to order it in stocks of 100. So I just take what that's going to come back and I multiply it by 100, and that'll tell me the price of what I need to reorder for this vendor. For unique parts, it's just about the exact same thing, only now it's a COUNTIFS. The only difference is because you're counting and not summing, you don't need that sum range or the average range that the other two have in. So that goes away, and now you just need your criteria range 1 and then your criteria range 2. And in this case, our criteria range 2 is less than 50. The same thing with average. Average and sum are identical, other than this one says sum and not average. So let's see if we can get some innovation going on here. So here I used kind of test scores, where you just have like a data entry of test scores, and every time you had a test, you just put in their name, the date, the grade, whether or not it was a test or just some sort of other grading factor, and then what subject it's in. Again, it was another dashboard here, but I added in a little more functionality to it so that you can add and subtract other people's names. And again, they're just a count. Here's a COUNTIFS for the total tests, because here it's asking if it's a test. So it's basically just counting how many yeses there are. The average grade throughout the whole thing, and then the average grade for just the tests. Down here, we're counting how many grades there are, so in total, so everything. Then how many tests, same thing we saw up here, only we're filtering it a little bit more for the person's name, and we can bring that up here. So just to explain it a little bit, is it's checking to see, just like above, whether or not it was a test, and then it's also filtering by name for whoever this name is here. In this case, it's Jack. And then we break it down even more. So here what I'm doing is, if you see above, we did a couple of things here. One of them is we're using AVERAGEIFS, and then I'm giving them a weight. In this case, this is a test. So I'm weighting the tests at 20%. That's where you see it multiplied by 0.2. And then I'm weighting everything else 80%. So the tests themselves are going to account for 20% of the grade, while everything else is going to account for 80% of the grade. And I see this a lot in colleges, where they'll tell you the tests are valued at a higher level, even if there's more non-tests. And so all I did was I did the AVERAGEIFS that you saw, filtering it all the way down by the name, the subject, because we're in history now, averaging the grade, and then we're also filtering the name. And then I do it twice. So you'll see they're just added together here. You'll see the same thing with the science, the math, and the English. It's actually pretty much the same formula. Once you get it down, you can really just copy it all the way down these 4 columns. Then what I also did was, over here in the final grade, I'm using a sum, but I decided to add a weighted system. So let's say English is 10% of the student's final grade, math is 30%, science is 30%, and history is 30%. So your final grade is, for Jack here, it's 82%. But when you're using the formulas versus just doing it by hand and putting in the grade, it allows you a whole lot more flexibility. So let's say science actually goes down to 20%, but then English goes up to 20%. You'll see that the amount of the grades themselves will actually change. So here you'll see Justin's got 79%. If English was actually worth, let's say, 30%, and history went down to 20, you'll see Justin here, his scores start going low because his English is so low. So you can actually play around with the percent of what subject weighted value for the final grade is, and it's very, very fun to do. If you guys noticed from the other videos, you see my little wow guy. Well, he's still here. I just, with 9 formulas, 9 functions to learn, he had to go down in the corner here. But it is still just as cool, and everything remains the same. So the whole idea of using formulas, like you've seen before, is that this table you'll never really have to change. You know, you can change the top percents up here, but if you needed to add tests, you can continue to add tests, and your dashboard here will reflect in real time the same everything. So that's about it. Thank you for watching. You can email me at practicalexcel2016@gmail.com. If you like this video, please click like, and if you'd like to continue watching the series, please click subscribe, because I'm going to be putting them out. It looks to be about every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 in the morning Eastern is my goal here. If you do end up liking these videos and you want to see more, please support me in Patreon. You can look me up under Practical Excel, and thank you very much. Bye.